Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here today with me. I'm Giorgio Natili. I'm from Italy. I don't like communication barriers, so the first thing that we have to do is just to make a crash course about the Italian accent.
The Italian man who went to Malta. One day I'm going to Malta to big hotel. In the morning I go down to eat a breakfast. I tell a waitress I want 2 pieces of toast. She brings me only 1 piece. I tell her I want 2 pieces. She say, go to the toilet. I say, you don't understand, I want to do piss on my plate. She say, you better no piss on the plate, you son of a bitch. I don't even know the lady, and she calling me a son of a bitch. Later, I go to eat at a bigger restaurant. The waitress brings me a spoon and a knife, but no fork. I tell her I want the fork. She telling me everyone want a fork. I tell her you don't understand, I want a fork on the table. She say you better not fork on the table, you son of a bitch. So I go back to my room in a hotel, and there is no sheets on the bed. Call the manager and tell him I want a sheet. He telling me to go to the toilet. I say, you don't understand, I want a sheet on my bed. He say, you better not shit on my bed, you son of a bitch. I go to the checkout and the man at the desk say, peace on you. I say, peace on you too, you son of a bitch. I'm going back to Italia. Arrivederci.
Okay, now we can understand each other, okay? Just a few words about me. I know that it's more interesting the topic rather than the presenter. I am a lead mobile engineer in McGraw Education. Giorgio Natili is my Twitter handle. I tweet not so much, but enough. I'm pretty critical about myself and about all the stuff that around software development. So if you want to read about critical thought, follow me. I am the founder of the Mobile Tea. Mobile Tea, it's a meetup, started in Rome. Now it's in Rome, Boston, and in Mexico. We'll come also to Toronto in the spring. It's a different way of doing technical meetups. It's 20 minutes talk, 20 minutes DJ and music, and fancy food. We don't do pizza and beer. We have an atmosphere like this. We are hosted by Twitter, Google, Facebook, TripAdvisor. All the major companies in Boston are supporting us, and we are planning to extend with Toronto, Chicago, New York, and San Francisco in 2016. But let's see. Let's start with a talk. So, first of all, how many of you are doing TDD? Okay. How many of you know what is TDD? That's great. Okay, thanks. And how many of you believe that it's effective doing TDD? Few. You will change your mind. Today, we'll talk about horrors in the TDD practices. So we'll start with the setup, tear down of test, what we can do to improve clarity and readability of test, which is a better way of mocking data. Remember, the perfect way doesn't exist. So we can find better ways to do things, but the perfect solution, it doesn't exist. We'll talk about behavior-driven development, and we will move TDD to a different level of abstraction, where we can really see which is the value that this practice can bring to you, to your organization. And we'll clarify what's good and what's bad in end-to-end testing and the goal of testing. We'll loop through real-life problems, and by real life I mean the idea of this talk. So this talk started with a red sign, okay? This is the typical red sign of test-driven development, where tests are failing. And it started with a bunch of notes that I started to write on paper. They really exist, are here with us, are in this room. So if you're interested, I can show you later. And this is like a diary of 2 years of experience in big enterprise that are supposed to do real TDD. So I have seen nice things and horrors. Today we'll talk about horrors. So you have an idea about what is TDD. But let's put everybody on the same page with a couple of concepts. So test-driven development, it's a development life cycle. It's not just about testing. I care about test, but I care more about the cycle. So you read the code, you read the specification, you write something that make the specification understandable for a computer, and then you write code. Then, when the tests are green, you start to refactor the code and you make it better. So you start writing really few lines of code. It's a different attitude. Instead of writing a long function and then refactoring it, you just work on a small chunk. It's an analysis tool. It's the way, it's the key to understand if your requirements are really effective or are just notes that the product people, sorry for the product people, brought on paper without thinking about a vision. And even more, with TDD, you are not lost anymore. You can find solutions to everything, almost everything. What is the setup and tear down phase of a test? It's when you start to initialize the objects that you are testing. By objects, I mean JavaScript objects, classes, or if you want to talk about mobile, Objective-C classes, protocol, Swift class, Android, everything can be tested. TDD is everywhere. But it's very important to keep your setup very, very, very small and easy. So let me give you an example. Can you read this code? This is the setup of a test that was just testing if a user can open or not a link. And this is a poor design in the server side, because the server side is initializing all these monster objects, and then all the model of the client-side JavaScript relies on this object. So having a setup that it's so badly organized, it's a symptom of a poor organization. Let me clarify about the two set of parentheses. Poor tests usually are a symptom of poor requirements. Poor requirements means that product people is not paying enough attention to what they are asking to you. This is lack of organization. And sometimes you have also a single test in application. You have to decouple the setup. You can, if you really need this setup, you cannot change the server-side implementation. That's fine, but try to make it better. Move the setup in an external file that is shared across tests, rather than having this code repeated every time. And even more, try to avoid people to read this code and understand what's going on. You have to be essential in your test. You don't have to test all the application. If you are not 100% test covered, you are not a bad person. You are still a good developer. Trust me. But don't use this sentence at your advantage. This is a real test. This is production code. So the test say, as the description said, is current URL, and as an assertion is expecting that a controller of an Angular app, how many of you do Angular? Okay? It's truthy. So it's not neither checking if it's defined or undefined. It's just truthy. And the expectation, it should pass a dummy test. This happened 5 months ago when I asked, okay, can you show me the test? They sent me the test. It's my fault. I said test, not tests. So they sent me the only test that was running the entire application, production code. Test, design, and code quality. TDD, it's all about designing your code. But be scared. Sometime, when you start to deal with big projects, with enterprise project, there is a huge phase of design. Big upfront design is not TDD, and usually it's bad, because if you design an entire model and without proving it through the code that can work, then you will have problems, because then you will start to have architects that have an assumption that the model works, and developers that start to make it working. Also, if a project is a big project, you have to follow the best practice. When you have to do a big pizza, you don't do this. You still use the classical way of doing pizza, and probably you combine more guys that do the pizza, more developers. Treat your code well. Tests are code. It's not garbage. It's part of your code base. When you see a test, you don't have, okay, well, it's a test, it's not production code, and you start to treat it not so well. Welcome your test. Treat them well. Write this code in a way that it's readable, understandable. And refactor only on green. It's very important. Every single developer, so no, that's wrong. Most of the developers want to write nice code. Not everybody. Otherwise, ugly code could not exist. When you write nice code, or when you try to write nice code, you always try to refactor your code to make it smaller, more reusable, decoupled, readable. And that's great. Don't do it until the test phase is not in the green phase. You write a test, everything is red. You satisfy the test. You write the less essential code that you need to satisfy the test, and then you start to look again to your test to check if are good, and then you write the code to satisfy the new condition. If an assertion is asking to you to verify that something is true, the first thing that you have to write in your function is return true. Then you start to think about the rest, and you start to write a small piece of code. Readability. A test has to be readable. It's your code base. How many of you opened a file written by another developer and started to think, hey, what the fuck is doing this guy? Okay. Do the same. Tests are code. So when you open a test, sometimes you look at the test, okay, say, okay, yeah, I cannot read it. Keep it readable. You have to write something that is absolutely understandable. Can someone tell me something about this code? This is another real piece of code. It's repeated 6 different times with just different flags. And please read carefully the name of the test. Test flag. What does it suggest to you? We're testing a flag. Okay, which flag? About what? What is flagging this flag? There is no meaning. So naming convention in test are important. You have the capability of use strings to describe what you are testing. So avoid to describe a test with comments. You see, there is a comment, completed activities should not show a due soon indicator even when due soon. Okay. I could write better English. And even more, it's in a comment. I'm forced to read it, and I'm reading like this. I'm not relaxed. I'm not enjoying the test. So if you don't like to read like this, please don't do it. The code, the test, are your friends, not enemies. An objection here can be, okay, but if we start to refactor, if we start to take care so much of clarity, good practices, and so on, it can happen that we go out of time. We just start a loop of infinite refinement without any progress. So let's start to time box the test activities. What I mean? Okay, how many of you knows about Agile? Huh? Everybody? Okay, so short cycles, 30 minutes. 30 minutes of test? No, 30 minutes split in 10, 10, 10. 10 of test, 10 of writing code, 10 of refactoring. Done. That's done for today. If the requirement is small, the test is small, the code is small, and after 30 minutes done like this, you are pretty sure that you have small, reusable, and understandable code. Respect the privacy. How many Java developers? How many Objective-C developers? Wow. JavaScript? Okay, yes, I'm at home. So, JavaScript doesn't really support privacy, right? You can emulate privacy. You can have a self-executing function that return an object, and you can just return what you want to expose. Okay, and then the question is, how I can test private functions? You shouldn't. So, if a function is intended to be private, not exposed, it means that you really don't want to test it. You want to use it. You can test the behavior of the function by testing the public methods or the exposed methods in the case of JavaScript. Don't try fancy techniques like reflection or method swizzling in Objective-C, or even worse, don't make everything public because you want to test it. That's terrible. That's horror code. Be aware that you have the challenge. There are repetitive cases. And there are tools to automate repetitive cases, like rep test. It's a node module. So when you test a function like the power, you have several assertions in your code. You are expecting different value for different situations. You cannot cover everything, and if you want to cover everything, this test will start to be 40 lines. You are not yet covering everything, and you are just creating confusion. You can use GenTest. It's a node module, and you can randomize the execution of repetitive tasks, of repetitive test cases. And then you feel better. You are not writing repetitive code, and you can be happy. You can be proud of your test. Clarity. Another key point. How you can be sure about the clarity of your test? Through the expectations. So a test usually is grouped into a describe function that describes the group of tests, and then there are expectations. You are expecting that if the user submits a wrong email, you get back something. False, a message, whatever. If the expectations are clear, you can then write nice test. Naming. Test flag, it's a bad name. Test flag for something else, it's a long name. Can be considered a bad practice too, because again, there are no Objective-C developers, thankfully, in this room. But Objective-C, for instance, the medium length of a method name, it's like this. This is Java. This is JavaScript. This is compressed JavaScript. So there are different lengths. In test, when you write a test, this code, it's still your code, but it's not code that another user will use. It's used by the test suite. So being a little bit more extensive in the name, it's absolutely not bad. Be explicit in the description. When you have an it or a describe or an expectation, be clear. Don't tell me in a test, I'm expecting that is not undefined. Again, I really don't care about it. Give me something useful. Respect the laziness. So good developers are lazy. We automate everything, right? Who use Grant? Gulp? Okay, you are lazy, you see? Respect this. You don't want to write 1,000 lines of code to understand what's going on. You want to take a look and understand immediately. Same with the test. Nice assertions, good descriptions, and a decent naming convention make other people able to take a look to the test and not spend hours to read it. Arrange, act, assert. It's a principle. You have to separate what is going to be tested from the setup and keep the verification step clearly identified. Space your code. Adding an extra line, empty line between assertions, it's not bad. It improves the readability. Conditional behaviors. That's one of my favorites. Reading a book about Objective-C, a very nice book. I was reading the part about TDD, and I found an example with, in the main view controller of this tutorial application, an if. And if the context of execution of the code is test, it was doing something, otherwise not. Nothing special, it's just setting a Boolean that is not so much important in the rest of the execution of the view controller, but it's changing the behavior. So if your behavior, it's right, your behavior can change accordingly to the context. As a human, you behave in a certain way if you are at home, in a different way if you are at a restaurant, but this is code. Come on. You cannot tell me that the code have to behave differently. Because if the code have to behave differently according to the context, you are in danger. And then you will see bugs coming everywhere and killing you. But remember, TDD is not about preventing bugs. It's about proving the exactness of behaviors, that you understand the requirement, and to keep the system more maintainable. There are unpredictable conditions in software development. And you cannot always prevent all of them, but you can still mitigate. Network responses and API. So again, how many of you are doing actively TDD? Okay. It's a pain to test the API network response or not? Okay. I see heads doing this. But it's not impossible. You have to be you have to start to think smart. So application relies on this network test. But if you start to test, to expect a response from a network request in your application, then you will start to have very poor performances. And what does it mean? It means that instead of having this funny, interesting cycle of write test, write the code, refactor, change the test, and blah, 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 we'll start to have, okay, I'm running the test. Okay, why you are smoking a cigarette? I told you, I'm rating. I'm running the test. And then the test starts to take 5, 6 minutes. My worst case scenario was 26 minutes. And it's real. There is a guy in this room that can tell you that it's true. He's laughing in the front line. Mind tap, 26 minutes, right? Yes. Mock data. Be smart. If you are expecting some data from the server, or from a local database, from whatever data source, please mock them. But be smart. Don't start to mock everything. If you are writing a small test, you are testing a specific behavior. If you are dealing with a specific behavior, you don't need the entire model. You need potentially just a single part. So create mocks that take only the few properties and methods that you need, eventually methods, and mock them. When you do something like this, when you really go to the server, you are creating an expectation that has to wait that the request is fulfilled. And then another terrible things happen. Sometimes test fails because we don't have reliable API or because we are not in control of this API. So it's external code. You don't maintain. Oh, there is maintenance. It's off. You get a bad answer. And then you start to think that your tests are failing while they are not. Behaviors. It's since the beginning of the talk that I'm talking about software behaviors, and I want to emphasize that TDD, it's not just about unit testing. It's about testing. When you say unit testing, the general expectation is you are testing a very small unit of code. It's not different with BDD, behavior-driven development. You are testing small behaviors. So the unit of code or the unit or the part of the software that you are testing, it's really small. It's a single small piece. Well, in this test, potentially you can have also some unit test where you're just testing the execution of a simple method or that something is true rather than false. But if you start to group them together, you are testing a behavior and not a single method return. You are combining the execution of different methods of your application, and then you start to do BDD. And when you do BDD, you can organize your behaviors in a logical way that describe through tests the features that you implemented in your application. If you group the test in a very well-organized way, you can understand just reading the execution of the test, just reading the results, what's going on, and if something is failing, you are able to immediately understand which part of the software it's failing. And by you, I don't mean just the developer. I mean the QA guy. I mean also the DevOps, whatever stakeholder of your project that is dealing with your test. I believe that tests have to be useful for everybody. So when I read the execution of the test or the failure, let's say the failure, because if you're reading the tests that are green all the day, I think that you can be fired. You have to focus the attention on the tests that are failing. But if you read this test, if you are a DevOps guy, you can understand if the test is well grouped, well defined, what is failing in your in the application. And you can detect if it's server side, client side. You can help. QA, they can have a better understanding on what's going on. How many of you have a good relationship with QA? How much is hard to have this good relationship? Sometimes we speak different languages, but it's not QA fault. It's development fault. It's our fault. We have to give them easy to understand and well-organized test. And we have to create a connection between behaviors and requirements. You have to start from a Jira ticket or a whatever tracking system ticket. I hate Jira. Who hates Jira? Okay. And you have to understand which is, not understand, you have to understand which is the scenario that you have to test, which is the exact feature that you're going to test. And then you have to write down the scenario, potentially in a format like given, then, when, or whatever, and then have a connection between this scenario and the tests that are executed. When the test is failing, you know which is the original ticket that was implemented and tested with this behavior. And then you can go back easily and understand even easier which part of your application is failing, and a developer can jump into the bug and start to work. I hate when I see developers that have to, the first thing when they see a defect, say, okay, I have to replicate it. Okay, so you don't trust QA. If QA is saying that it's failing, it's failing. But you have to create this trust relationship through a connection. QA, development, DevOps, behaviors, scenario, requirement are just one single family. Divide this test logically. If you are not able to divide the test logically, then it means that you are in front of a complexity. And potentially you cannot solve this complexity. So, if this is happening, you have to go back to into your backlog, check the requirements, and understand if these requirements are well organized or not. A developer is not just a guy that writes code to make product happy. Okay? I strongly believe into it. People that work with me see me fighting every day with product people to make them aware that we are really happy to help and serve product, but they have to respect us, giving us good requirements. When I cannot write a test, or when I cannot organize in a decent way a test, I go back to requirement and say, hey, to product people and say, hey, sorry, but this requirement sucks. I use exactly this word. I have a guy that can say, yes, it's true. And once I do this, we start to fight, but then potentially we can define better requirements and having better tests. The key is to connect scenarios, use cases, and behaviors. In this way, you get a great value. You have QA that is aware about what you are testing, development that really understand the requirement, not because they cannot understand the requirement, but because they clarify with product people the requirement, and product start to understand that what they ask sometimes It's not, hey, but come on, it's just a button. Yes, in the middle of other 200 buttons with a flexbox alignment on the left and have to be rendered gracefully on 20 different devices. It's not just a button. They have to understand this. You have to do this. I'm proud to say that more than once, I paired with QA. I brought QA guys close to me, debugging into the Chrome developer tools, explaining the reason of the bug. And as a result, after doing this 3-4 times, we got QA guys that when are opening a defect were explaining to us how they proved and what they did into the debug tools, and potentially also give us the eventual exception in the console. How much it's easier to work in this way. Keep this connection. End-to-end testing. So there are behavior tests, that it's a wrapper on top of different units of tests that behave in a specific way when working together. And there are end-to-end testing. End-to-end, it's when you test that someone click a button and something is happening. Don't test for pixels. I've seen a lot of people claiming that the test was failing because after adding a new feature, the UI was different, or even worse, the action that get recorded for implementing a specific UI was assuming that the button was in a very specific position. Don't test the pixels, please. If you want, grab a screenshot, but don't start to counting elements. I've seen tests like, hey, the menu needs to have four sub-menu voices. Fine, okay, this test sucks. Now it's nice. We have to prove it. Okay, 2 months later. Hey, we have a test failing. What's going on? It's expecting 4 elements. There are 3. Yes, we introduced the localization, and now we removed a couple of voice menu element for Italian or Spanish. Don't count elements. It's terrible. The end-to-end tests have to be useful. You have to write them if you want to prove that something is working as expected. Have to be smart. You have to start to write them as soon as the requirements are ready. Don't keep QA without doing anything. They are dangerous. Which are the real goal of testing? Do you ever ask it to yourself? There are so many values. A test has to be profitable. So every time that you write a software, you want to do some profit. By profit, I don't mean just money, okay? You want to improve your skills. You want to release something to the open source community because you get a lot from them, because you want to prove that you're good, that you're a good developer, or because you are paid. So how many of you are developers? How many of you get a salary? Okay, you are doing profit from your software. The tests have to be profitable too. So when I see a test that is not giving me value, then I go mad. Value means clarity, means improve the maintainability of a software. And you have to really be focused on this. TDD is not to prevent bugs. TDD can help to prevent regression bugs. But TDD, even more, it's a way to prove that the behavior that you implemented in the past can be still effective with new features that get implemented today. Don't separate developers and testers. I'm living a nightmare because we don't have QA people. In Boston, we have the QA people. I'm from Boston. I'm from Rome. I work in Boston. We have QA people in New York. It's so difficult to create a nice relationship with QA that is testing 20 different projects from another office. Keep them all together. Fight for it. Go to your manager. Fire the manager. You can fire your manager. Can I fire my manager? Yeah, okay. Trying to enforce pair programming also on testing. Most of the time, when you do pair programming, you write code together or you write tests together. Try to separate the concern, okay? Today, Giorgio will write the test and Jonathan will write the code. Tomorrow, the opposite. So keep a developer focused for one day just on testing and for one day on coding. You will have a different perspective and you will mix different ideas in a different way. Trust me, it can work because rather than having just a general agreement on everything, you will have strong opinion that start to mix each other. Because if I'm in charge of test for one day, I will be strong on what I'm testing, okay? And potentially the other pair can be stronger on ECMA 6 implementation or new features or something like that. And you start to have these different point of view that switch every single day. Work hard on your preconditions. If you cannot define the precondition of a test, the test is not useful. If the test is not useful, it's not profitable. If the test is not profitable, it's garbage. If the test is garbage, I don't want to add anything else. Focus on quality. It's difficult to define which is a good quality test. It varies accordingly to your project, the frameworks that are involved, and the organization itself. And by organization, I mean not the way of just doing tests, but the business industry in which you are working on. Try to define a metric that works for your organization, not for the entire company, for your team, for the specific project in a specific time frame, and review it. Validate test. Write test. Validating test. Write tests that validate a behavior, not that prove that your software returned true or false. Unit testing, it's just proving that when I give to this function a number that is less than 35, has to return true or false. Behavior testing, it's testing that this function, when executed with this number, in conjunction with a social security number calculator or whatever else, give me an expected result. Because potentially a guy that has less than 10 years old cannot have a social security number. Just guessing, but group things together. Define a behavior of a software. Writing tests takes time. People that tell you, hey, with TDD, I'm faster, don't trust them. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. Why it's not true? If you have to write twice amount of code, you need more time. Keep these in your estimate, but please avoid something like, okay, can you give me an estimate to add this button? And let's say that it's a simple button in a simple single-page web page application. And then you see developers say, couple of days. What? Yeah, we have to write test. Oh. So you want to use test to get more time to implement a single button? I screw you. Be honest in your estimation. Test needs more time. True. Don't use it. If you need 2 days to implement the test of a single button, potentially you are saying, and let's say that you are honest on it, there is a big problem in the code base. Because if you need 2 days to write the test for a button, there is a kind of nightmare setup and tear down that is in place. Tests are mixed up and so on. Questions? Yep.
You have
So the question is how many tests you write for a single page application that have a list of items rather than end-to-end test. I would say that, so from your question, I would say I will not write any end-to-end test because you haven't said to me that when the user see the item can click on it. So I say, okay, it's just rendering, no end-to-end test. I will do it in behavior, testing the behaviors. Other questions? Yeah? I didn't get the question. Can you repeat? Sorry. Oh. Okay. How do you sell to client and business TDD? Are two different beasts. Client, you don't sell it to the client. You do it. So if you are a small organization, you don't do, or a big organization, whatever, that work for a customer, you don't go to the customer saying, hey, you know, the rate for writing code is this one, this is the rate for testing, or the estimate change accordingly if you want to use test or not. You just use test, and it's transparent for the end customer. With business, in a big organization, this is different, because then you have people that allocate resources to your development teams to do something, and you have to justify why you need more time. Well, you have to be honest and say, hey, without test, will not have maintainability, and you can go through common use cases that you can find on the web. It's full. Then they will say to you, no. Trust me. They will say, no, don't do it. We don't need it. And then after 6 months, you will come back with the email printed out and say, hey, we are skipping this release. You remember 6 months ago I was talking about test-driven development? And then they will tell you, yes. And I say to you, we have to implement by the end of the year. And it's happening right now to me. So it's true. It's really true. Other questions? So I want to thank Sean for organizing this conference, Jacqueline that organized my trip, Rafael Fernandez that helped me with the slides, and Jonathan Barton that reviewed all the misspelling. And I want to thank you for taking the time and staying with me this morning. Thanks.